Hi guys, welcome back to Nana Chats. Thank you so much for coming back again to join us for another interesting topic. Today we have beautiful Jojo over here.
Hi.
Who's just gonna basically share some of her story with us, and hopefully in doing so creating some awareness, or there might be people out there who can perhaps relate to it, or hopefully I hope that it helps someone out there really. So yeah, I hope you enjoy and stay tuned. This topic is about premature babies, and I just kind of felt that people don't really talk about the topic if it doesn't happen to them or if it doesn't concern them. They just kind of like, oh, my friend had a premature baby, and then like that's where it ends. So I just kind of in a way wanted to create some sort of awareness that even if it's not in your life, you can still learn about it and talk about it, and perhaps relate to other people who might be going through it. If you don't know, with my little knowledge, I think the NHS classes premature babies as any child that's born before 37 weeks. I know there's some more specifications, but I don't know. I'm not an expert, so yeah. So yeah, we're gonna get straight into it. So my first question to you is, how old was J-Lo when she was born? How many weeks?
So when J-Lo was born, she was 23 weeks, or rather, I was 23 weeks plus 4 days pregnant.
Yeah.
So she was classed as, you mentioned about the NHS guidelines, about under 37 weeks is a premature baby. The age that J-Lo was born, she's what's classed as extremely premature. Don't ask me to do all the different classifications, but basically because she was under 24 weeks, which is the UK's age of abortion, she's classed as extreme prem with very little likelihood of survival.
For all you guys out there, Jayla's her beautiful little girl. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure I read somewhere that, well, I think on the NHS website, that at 24 weeks is when it's kind of, I don't like the way they put it, but they'll kind of say where life is viable, which sounds a bit like not nice, but yeah. And Jayla was born before that. So when was the initial point when you thought, oh, I have to go to hospital, something's not quite right?
Yeah, so it was actually 2 days before we actually went to the hospital that probably the whole situation started. I was over at a friend's house and we were having dinner, and I just felt like, but I actually thought I'd spilled like a bit of juice on myself or something, but I felt a little bit wet, and I went to the bathroom and I noticed that I was spotting a bit, but it wasn't anything much than what I had been told can happen in pregnancy anyway. So by that point, I was, like I say, just coming to 5 months pregnant, just getting my tiny little baby bump. And so I excused myself, explained the situation, and we called 111, which is the UK non-emergency number. They sent an ambulance over, they checked me out, they listened to baby's heartbeat, everything was fine. And because the pregnancy had been classed as completely normal, not high risk or anything, they said these things happen sometimes, and because there was no further spotting, I should be fine. The following evening, however, it happened again. This time I was at home, and it was a little bit more, so I thought, well, I better go see a doctor. But I remember again not being very worried because I actually insisted on finishing my dinner before we drove to the hospital because I was hungry, as babies can make you. We got to the hospital, and it was when I actually got there that I felt like even more of it was almost like a gushy kind of feeling. And I just thought, oh, that doesn't feel right. And we're in the hospital room, so I asked to quickly go use the bathroom, and it was almost like the same amount as you would get on, let's say, a heavy period, which would not be normal in a pregnancy. And the doctor came very swiftly afterwards and said, we have to do an examination now. She barely examined me and looked up, and it was when I saw that look in her eyes that I knew something was actually wrong. Up until that point, I think I still kind of was thinking, oh, it might be something wrong, but nothing that I felt was like a serious endangerment to this baby's life. And she looked up and said, I'm so sorry, your cervix is opening, and it looks like this baby could be born imminently. at that stage, I was only 22 weeks plus 6. And when you're under 23 weeks, that's classed as kind of no intervention type thing, because they think there's just zero chance. And they actually told me that, yeah, I might expound on this more further on in this discussion, but it was at that point where I started hearing these words, like you mentioned, about viability, percentages. And I remember hearing all this and kind of, it's almost like I was half hearing it, half just in this weird stillness. And I remember a midwife coming up to me, the midwife who was in the room, and gave me a hug and said, "I'm so sorry, sometimes these things happen." And I remember feeling this sudden, I don't know if I'll call it anger, but this like defensiveness come up. And I just said, to myself, nothing has happened yet. I'm not giving in yet. But I refused to also just be rude to her sympathy. So I just said, "Thank you for your care, And then they said, "Oh, we'll give you a moment to learn." And they walked out. It was a nurse, a consultant, and the consultant, 2 consultants, and 2 midwives. And they walked out. And I remember looking up at Justice, who's my husband, and feeling this, when you feel like that mango rising up in your throat. And just, I didn't even know what to say. I was shocked, I was scared, I was wondering what to do. And as I tried to open my mouth to say something like what just happened, he didn't say anything. He instantly just covered me. And I literally mean covered me, enveloped me as I was laying on the bed, and just started praying. And he just started praying and just prayed in the spirit, prayed in words, just prayed. And as he prayed, I felt something easing me too, and I just started praying. And we were there just praying for the whole time that they gave us. To me, it felt like 3 hours, but I think it was probably only like 25 minutes, maybe even less. And yeah, so that was the day when we realized this was going to be a different journey.
Gosh, that's scary. Because I guess when you're in pregnancy, you don't really think negative, or you try not to anyway, and you think, oh, something's wrong. Oh, no, it'll be okay. This happens to everyone. So I guess you don't ever think it'll get to that extent where they're like, oh, this child might not make it. I guess that doesn't really cross. I can't even imagine or comprehend even that being said to me. So I know you said that 23 weeks, a few days. Did you say 20? No, I can't remember what you said now. 22
weeks. I got to the hospital when I was 22 plus 6.
Yeah.
Which is 1 day away from being 23 weeks.
Okay, at what point did you realize that, oh my gosh, I actually might have to give birth?
As soon as we got in, they said to us, "Your cervix is opening. This baby will be born imminently." And under 23 weeks, they basically, in an empathetic way, but quite particular, made it clear to us that the chances of survival, the percentage was close to naught, under 23 weeks. There I was in the hospital, 22 plus 6, being told that anything under 23 weeks is basically, I'm saying written off, but they weren't that, they were very empathetic, very kind in how they were trying to explain it, but that was the basic message. I was told I could have these 2 injections if I had been 23 weeks, but it was something like 9 p.m. and I would be 23 weeks at midnight. And to me, I was thinking, well, that's just like a few hours away, but it just goes to show you how convinced they were that this baby was going to be born now, based on their examination of my cervix and the situation, the amount of blood I had lost since I arrived at the hospital. They just thought, there's just no way. We need to prepare her for this late miscarriage / stillbirth, and that became their priority, to prepare us mentally and emotionally for that. But I think the way I kept responding again was showing that I just had other ideas, and we had been in that room praying. And don't get me wrong. I think what they were trying to do was dutiful and right, because there's sadly so many women, and it's another element that needs awareness about, who suffer late miscarriages and stillbirths. And it's important that they get the the support emotionally and mentally that they need. In this situation, however, there was something in me that felt this was not what was happening right now. And so I just said, I remember saying to the doctor, it's okay, I'll wait. Because he said, oh, if you were 23 weeks, we could have done it. And I said, oh, I'm only like a few hours away. And he's just like, fortunately, because of the situation, we don't think it would be worth putting you through the injection. And I said, it's okay, I'll wait. And he was kind of like, okay. And so I waited for 3 hours. I remember crossing my legs as well.
You are not going anywhere.
Crossing my legs as well, and keeping my legs together, and just praying and praying. And we stayed up, and as literally when the clock hit midnight, they came in. They said, well, we did tell you 23 weeks. They gave me the injections. They again warned me that this is not to promise, anything. It's still 23 weeks. But they said, let's see what happens next, and then they left us in the hospital room. I mean, they didn't leave us, but they left us to the rest of the night. And that was the start of the hospital stay before the birth.
So were those injections to help contractions then bring back?
No, those injections were to boost her organ development. So at that stage, if they're born, just the strength of, I'm kind of making it I'm not scientifically inclined in this way, but I know one was specifically for the lungs, because that's the main thing with premature birth as well. Not the main thing. One of the main things is the organs are just underdeveloped, but the lungs, obviously, you need to be able to breathe on your own. And so one of them is to try to boost the lungs. And the other one was, again, it was one of the organs that would just try to basically give her the best fighting chance of being able to survive outside the womb at such an underdeveloped state.
Oh, so what they were saying, because she wasn't 23 weeks, they weren't going to give you that. And because
they weren't going to give it because under 23 weeks, I guess medically it's just seen as the likelihood of it having an impact percentage-wise is just so low that it's not. And they were so convinced after checking me that literally we would see this child come out within a matter of minutes, if not within the next few hours. So they didn't think I was going to make it to 23 weeks. But because I had been so adamant that I would wait, the minute the clock stopped midnight, I was like, Buzz, give me the injections. I waited till they're like, okay. And they did that. And so we started that journey. We were then in the hospital for another 4 days. So we're in the hospital in total. So we were in the hospital for another 4 days, which is obviously she was born at 23 plus 4. And throughout those 4 days, to me, it just seems so strange that it was only 4 days, because I think back at them and they feel like a lifetime, because the amount of things that we encountered and went through and developed and grew in is just mind-boggling.
I guess it's hard in medicine because there has to be a cut-off. You can't just be like, oh, we'll just wait and see. There has to be a cut-off of everything. But it's just mind-boggling to think that they were like, oh, there's no point waiting a few hours. It's just crazy to me to think, like, I don't know. I can't comprehend it.
They were willing to wait hours and give it at that point. But before that, I think from what I could perceive, at that stage, their priority becomes the mental and emotional well-being of the mom. And I think, to me, I actually see as part of our miracle story, our testimony, because I think for a medical practitioner to be that convinced that the 3 hours wouldn't see this child still within my womb makes me recognize even more what a miracle it was, because they will have seen countless women, sadly, in a very similar situation. It's not like I would be the first one to come in. And so they would have a background, they would have their research and experience to let them know, with this amount of blood, with this level of opening in the cervix, at this time within the pregnancy, we don't want to give false hope. And I think what it reminds me of is that in those moments, um, I couldn't find my hope in the doctors because based on everything they knew rightly, they couldn't provide that hope. It wouldn't be ethically right in their minds. But I could find that hope in God.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that when babies sadly don't make it, that people didn't hope in God, but it means that the strength to endure that situation was found in God's peace. And I was just gonna wait in that and see what happened. But I was determined that it didn't feel like the end of the road.
Gosh, you are a strong woman. In a way, being a Christian and having, oh, by the way, guys, if you don't know, I'm a Christian, so Jojo, but hey. So yeah, I guess being a Christian, you have something to hold on to. And I often wonder, like, if you're not, like, what do you hold on to? Where do you get your hope? Where do you get your strength? So that's really encouraging. Can you talk us through your actual birth then?
Yeah. So like I said, after the injections, we then had 4 more days in hospital, which again seems crazy to me because it feels like when I look, it just felt like it was so much longer. After I had those injections, that was stage 1 of the miracle, looking back. Because again, like I said, they didn't think we'd get to that point. Stage 2 of the miracle was there's a procedure called a cervical suture, which basically they try to stitch up the cervix to keep everything in, everything being the baby. But again, because of because of what they had seen, because of how early on I was, at that first stage, they didn't want to offer me a suture straight away. Again, because there was still the percentages I think was still too highly stacked again. But I think on the second, so we stayed there one night. They came back, they saw me on the second night. And when they realized that, okay, she's actually been here for 2 days, this baby is still, the heartbeat was strong. I remember I have a picture of me. I was on the bed, the incline was, my head was here, and my legs were there. Literally, those hospital beds. Because they said at this stage, everything helps. So they're saying, it sounds silly, but gravity, once they realized that, you know what, we're going for this, they once it was that slither of chance, they were all behind it. The nurses were amazing. The doctors came in and they said, okay, we're going to offer to do a suture to try to help. I remember one of the doctors saying, that there are risks with the suture because obviously it can expose me and the child to infection because they're going very close to the cervix. But she was saying, if you were my daughter, I would advise you to do it. I remember thinking that was a very sweet personal way for her to try to explain. And I said, yes, I'll go for it, and they explained it was going to be painful afterwards. Anyway, we'll go back to that. But I went in and I asked the midwife, can I take in music with me? And she said, of course, because in our room for the 2 days, we got known as the gospel room because we were just like music was on the whole time. We could spend gospel, worship, praise jams, just to fill the atmosphere. And I think sometimes when you're in a hard situation, it can be in the silence and the absence of anything that your thoughts can wander. And so I wanted, anytime I had a gap in thoughts or silence or room for fear to overtake me, for praise to be there, to be that barrier. The Bible says that peace of God that surpasses all understanding guards our hearts and mind in Christ Jesus. And I'm like, it was literally like a guard. And so I went in for this surgery and they allowed me to have music in the theater. And I remember they were all jamming to it as well. And I was awake. They just numbed me from the waist down. And there was actually a little, another miracle in that exam, in that surgery, because Jayla stuck her foot through my cervix, which they called people in to see because apparently that had never happened before. And me being hilarious was like, get a photo! Handed them my mobile phone, which had the music. And they're there, basically down near my lady parts, taking a photo because I was like, I want to see the foot sticking up. Because when they said, oh my gosh, the baby's just stuck the foot through, and then they have to try to basically push her foot back in. And at that size, her foot would have been like it was a tiny little foot. And they called, and they were like, people were like being paged to come in and see this medical phenomenon. Anyway, because she stuck her foot through, they needed to have 2 people come work on me, because one had to kind of push the foot back in and the other then had to stitch, whereas before it would just be one person stitching. So this is why I was saying it was extremely painful, because the next day when they asked me what pain was I on, they were offering me morphine, because they said, what pain are you on, 1 to 10? And I was like, can I say 11? And I was trying to be very polite, but I was like, it really hurts. And they said, I remember the lady said, you had 4 hands in your hoo-ha. It will hurt. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. So I was really fortunate also in that exam that they had 2 of the best. I can't remember the exact details, but I remember them telling me, like, the person who performed the operation, or the procedure rather, was not meant to be in, but they happened to come in on call for something else and happened to be free in that slot, so offered to help out. So anyone else might have actually struggled in that situation when the foot popped out, to know what to do, but she was able to instantly deal with it. And once again, it was another confirmation to me that we're on for a good fight here. I was going to tell you about the birth. So that way, it's just, there were so many testimonies in this.
I'm thinking Jayla was like, I'm fighting here. You guys try to get rid of me, my foot will tell you, okay? I'm not going anywhere.
We have a joke about her foot now, because we're just like, man, she was ready to step into her destiny. And I was like, not yet, child. Come back. But so I had that surgery on day 2, and on day 3, it was a mixed emotion day, because day 3 was celebrating the surgery. I mean, the operation, not even operation, procedure is what formal term, had gone successfully. They'd managed to close the cervix. Everything seemed fine. Baby's heartbeat was fine. But they were telling me that one of the risks with this procedure as well is that if they prick the amniotic, the sac that baby's in, if the fluid starts to come out, then obviously the baby would need to be, induced, because they need to have that amniotic fluid around them. And because when she pushed her leg through, she pushed it through in the sac. That's why it was such an incredible sight, because you would never see that. Because usually if a baby's coming through, obviously the sac's broken because they're being born. So they were telling me all these things that could possibly happen, but in the immediate time after the procedure, everything seemed fine. However, when they came to do some of my obs in the afternoon, they said they noticed my infection markers from my last test that they did immediately afterwards seemed a little bit high. And also they noticed that because I had to wear dressing and different things, they said that they could see some fluid when they were checking me, and they thought it might be some of that amniotic fluid. So they had to monitor that. So it was a bit of a, but we were just staying positive and trying to keep ourselves, in God, in peace, both in the faith and the I guess realness of this situation. They came later that evening to say that they were pretty convinced that the amniotic sac had potentially been burst, which would mean that I'm most likely going to have to be induced, because the fact that that's happened and with the surgery and my infection markers going up, I, as the mom, was now at risk of sepsis. And until the baby's born, medically, I'm their first priority. So they wanted me to be induced so that they could basically save my life. And I asked them for another 24 hours. And they were telling me within 24 hours, they were saying, sepsis kills very quick. They had done, because they had done a secondary blood test and my things were skyrocketing, and they were saying sepsis is this and that. And I just didn't feel peace that it was the time. I just didn't feel it was right. And we spoke very calmly, like we didn't get aggro or anything, but we just said, please give us 24 hours. And a lovely nurse agreed to wait with me throughout the night. And they only agreed so long as I was monitored continuously throughout the night. Any spike in fever, any spike in, I felt fine, to be fair. But my obs were doing things, and I was like, I don't know. I think I was just living in some kind of bubble piece, because like, they're like, do you feel unwell? I'm like, no, you know. And but they kept monitoring my obs. My obs stayed fine throughout the night. I remember there was one time the nurse stepped out, and I remember I could feel myself a little bit hot. And when the nurse stepped out, I said to Justice, open the window, take off my blanket. I was like, cool me down. Because I was so worried that if I was hot, they would induce me right there and then. And I just felt like I had to wait. I just felt this strong urge to give this little baby 24 more hours. And so he was cooling me down. He's like, you sure you know which possible? I'm like, no, I'm fine. Just cool me. I was like, don't worry, Justice. I'm not going anywhere. I'm fine, you know. And yeah, so then the nurse came back in and I was checking temperature, and I'm like, oh, I'm fine. Swimming in the ear. Anyway, came back in the morning. The nurse had been like, she was fine throughout the night, but they did one more blood test, and then that afternoon it came back because they were doing emergency turnovers, and the numbers were ridiculously high, and they were saying they don't actually understand how I'm not feeling very poorly. And at that point they said, we highly recommend we induce you now. And that time, just as now, we asked if we could have a moment. We prayed, and we felt like, you know, it feels like the right time. So this is when I was now 23 plus 4, when she was going to be born. And they induced me, and the contractions are the same when you're induced to a prem baby, because your body doesn't know how small they are, so they just contract. But the actual pushing, I mean, it's just like, as soon as the baby hits that floor, it's just like, you know, they're out. So it's not much to. If we have another, well, we do want to have another baby, and by God's grace, it will be full term. So I think I'm gonna have a bit of a shock when it comes to what 7 to 9 pounds feels like. But the contractions are the same. And yeah, and then she was born that afternoon, weighing 555 grams, which, to put it in context, that's about 1 pound 2 ounces, which is roughly the weight of a block of butter. And she was measuring around 24 centimeters. So if you think of a 30 centimeter ruler, that's about how long she was from head to stretched out toe. And that also was a testimony, because the day before, when they had, I don't know how they scan measure, and they estimated 464. This was part of the reason why I wanted to wait 24 hours, because anything under 500 grams, they again say the viability risk is not there. But once you're over 500 grams, it's still extreme premature, but I think it went up to like 30% survival rate. And I was like, she will be over 500 grams. So when she came out, and I remember them telling me a baby can't put on like 100 grams overnight. And I was like, 24 hours, give me 24 hours. Just feed me grapes. And so when she came out 555, to me, that was another miraculous sign, and another like confirmation that this was the beginning of something. It was not the end. Yeah, and so she was born. I have some tokens to show you later on, or whenever you'd like to see.
Cool.
How she was.
I'm actually very shocked that they agreed to wait 24 hours, because when it comes to sepsis, like, especially in that area, I know that, like, I remember when I was doing my induction, I think sepsis was one of the things that they, this was, I think, a few years back, they were like quite hot on, because I think they had quite a few incidences to do with sepsis. So like, even now in the hospital, everything I see is sepsis, query sepsis. Like, they're really hot on sepsis. And I guess it's one of those things that can literally take you out just like that. It's so fast. And I think it's one of those things where they kind of predict it's going to be sepsis rather than wait till it's sepsis, because once it's sepsis, it's like you're kind of too late. So I'm quite surprised they actually gave you 24 hours as like a pregnant woman. That's really scary, but it just goes to show, right? Miracles do happen.
It was, I could tell that I don't want to say that the one who I spoke to, I remember a look in her eyes, almost as if like she just feared the worst, for me. But at that stage, they must have been able to, whatever, because we still had a final blood test pending. I remember them. I remember them using words like, "We strongly urge you," we this and that. But I think it hadn't yet reached the point where they could just say, "This is a medical emergency and we will intervene." Your life is. So, but when it hit the next day, as soon as those blood results came, that's when they came in and they said, "This is happening." So when we said, "Oh, can we pray about, like, can we have a moment?" It was more like, have a moment to digest that you're about to be induced. But like you said, it wasn't like, do you want to go for it now, or do you want another 24 hours? Yeah, it was very much like whatever markers they had seen on that last one. But they were still shocked because clearly within those 24 hours, my infection markers had jumped straight up. And they were just shocked that I didn't see more poorly than I was. But I remember what made me also feel really adamant, like, yes, this is the right time as well, was when they were telling me this, they were saying, "Look, this is for you, but also if your baby has any chance with the infection markers this high, like, they would be at risk as well." And then I was like, induce me.
I kind of find it empowering as well, because I remember because before I had Nathaniel, I went through hypnobirthing, and I remember one of the things that the lady said to us was like, just remember that it's your body, and just because you get told you have to do this now, you have to push now, or you have to do this now, just remember that it's your body and you still also have control over your body. So in a way, I kind of find that empowering as a woman, that you also have a say over your body, because I think a lot of people think, oh, the doctors know it, or the nurses know it, or not to say that you don't, or no disrespect, but obviously they're going on experience and statistics and so on and so forth. But I find that empowering when you just know that I have some sort of right for my body as well, and I am going to wait, or I am, like, whether it's 3 hours or 24 hours, I am going to wait. So I find that quite empowering as a woman. My next question to you is, you've pretty much answered loads of my questions, but it's good. How was it once Jayla was born? Because, like, I vaguely remember you saying that they were like, oh, we're just gonna wait and see, like, what happens once you gave birth. But you, like, she came kicking and, like, crying. So, like, what was that experience like mentally and emotionally, like, and physically? How was that experience like then seeing her born?
So, funnily enough, when they induced me, I remember it was a weird mixture, because it was still excitement, and I felt something in myself said, I still want to take ownership of this as my first birth. I still want to have a memory of this as my first birth. I don't want to think of this as just a horrible, traumatic moment. And don't get me wrong, these situations are traumatic, but I think that kind of mentality helped me navigate a traumatic incident without being traumatized after, which is the way I kind of differentiated. So I told myself, I'm going to own this story, and my baby's about to be born, and I want to look forward to that. So I remember trying gas and we did the typical thing where, like, when the nurse went, I was like, just try it. I actually remember the first time I tried it when the contractions had started. And I started laughing and I started saying, this is drugs, man. What? I was sitting there saying, all these women have been taking drugs. So I said, just try. He tried some and he was like, So it was like, there was a bit of normalcy in that. But I'm sure any person who has gone through a prem birth or a prem, whether, a natural birth or C-section, will tell you they still always in the back of your mind, you always know this is slightly different, because for us anyway, they had already wheeled in all the neonatal equipment. You could see the incubator, you could see everything ready, awaiting this imminent birth. And so there's a way that it's like normal, but I think also because for us it was our first child, we also didn't really have a comparison to be able to realize the extent of its difference. So it was just the first birth we knew. Whereas I think if you'd had another child, you would have been much more aware of the difference in which things were being handled. And so, yeah, so they prepared us for anything potentially happening when she was born, or at least they warned. I remember once being told, we're just trying to prepare you for the worst. And I said, yeah, but I'm hoping for the best, And they're like, yes, we're hoping with you, And so they said when she was born, they might not be signs of life, but if they are, we'll do everything we can. That was the phrase they used, just to let you know they may not be any signs of life. When she came out, boy, were they signs of life. Not only was she wriggling, but we had like these I remember it was 3 little cries. And I didn't realize it was her straight away. It might have been partially the gas in there, and also I couldn't really see. But because she was so small, they can't really do the whole holding up like usual. They kind of, as soon as she comes out, they have to take us straight over to the neonatal equipment. But I remember just seeing like this flash of tiny little, kind of tiny little person thing. Babies always look a bit weird when they're born anyway, but this one is like micro. And just hearing this like, ah! But it was like 3 high-pitched notes. It sounded almost like, it sounds funny, but it sounded like a mouse. And I remember saying to Justice, what is that? And then he said, it's the baby. And I was like, oh my gosh, praise God. And then also they were trying to because they have to put this little mask on their nose to help them breathe. And they, no, actually, no, that was later stage, not a mask. They intubate them. And so when they tried to intubate her the first time, she pulled it out. And so then they had to intubate her again. But again, to me, they told me all this afterwards, but I was like, fighter, because to basically be able, she didn't literally pull it out. I mean, that would be quite incredible, but basically tugged on it and took it out of place, so they had to re-intubate. But they were telling me afterwards that like this kiddo is a fighter, to make noises, move around, and to the point of grabbing onto the tube it's incredible. And again, from there we were then like, yes, baby girl, yes, yeah.